Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. We are going to be talking about downsizing today, but it is not going to be about decluttering. We are going to talk about keeping you as a senior in control of your future. So I'll be recording this session today, and if you have friends or family that you think might benefit from the information I'm presenting today, please share this with them. That would be great. I want to help as many people as possible. So let's get to it. We talk about planning for our future, and of course, you hear about people planning for their retirement financially, saving and investing. And you also hear about people planning for possible medical issues through Medicare, health insurance, supplemental insurance. And that makes sense because those two things go hand in hand, right? You need money to pay your premiums and your copays and that sort of thing. But what many people don't realize is that housing compatibility is important in that puzzle as well. And unfortunately, they don't think about it many times until it's too late. Your housing can be significantly impacted by changes in your financial status and your medical situation. So why don't people think about stuff like that? So surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, I hear a lot, you're going to take me out of here in a pine box. Okay, that's nice. Don't we all just wish, we just go real quick, just die in our sleep? That's amazing. But as we all know, with our medical advances, that doesn't happen as often anymore. We're living longer, but are we necessarily living better lives because we're living longer? The other thing I hear from people a lot is, yeah, not ready to downsize yet. I have too much stuff to deal with. Okay, well, somebody's going to have to deal with the stuff eventually. And these two ways of thinking is actually leading to a crisis, not just for individual families, but for society as a whole. So in order for seniors to let go of this, it's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to be the one that has to move to assisted living. I'm not going to be the one that needs skilled nursing care. I'm not going to be the one that has to have somebody come in and help me with the daily activities that I need to live independently. We need to start educating people about their future options so that they can think about those before a crisis happens. So congratulations to you on taking a step towards educating yourself on the reasons that you should not only be thinking ahead about your financial situation and your medical situation, but how that ties in with your housing situation. So today I'm going to share with you some data and some client stories so that you can start thinking realistically, being really honest with yourself about your current situation or your loved one's current situation, and taking steps that will help keep you in control of your future. So the reason I am so passionate about this topic is when I was 8 years old, way back, our vacation was cut short abruptly. We lived in Florida and we had gone to Michigan on vacation. And my parents got a phone call that my grandfather had passed away suddenly while they were on vacation. He just had a massive heart attack and died quickly. So my grandmother was a new widow and they owned a large piece of property and a house in rural Florida. And she was not at all prepared to take care of that house and that property. And she had absolutely no idea what to do. So No idea what to do. What am I going to do? Now, even though I was young, I was only 8 at the time, I didn't really understand all the details, but I clearly remember the chaotic feeling that followed. Now, as an adult, my parents shared how stressful the decisions were, that decision-making process that they had to go through to figure out how to help my grandmother, and how they wished that the situation that they were in had played out differently. So they explained the stress wasn't really from the stuff. A lot of people say, oh, the stuff is so stressful. But it was those difficult conversations surrounding these quick decisions that had to be made. What are we going to do? We have to do something quickly. My grandmother didn't feel comfortable where she was. So, some people are comfortable where they are, and so decisions don't have to be made quickly. But because of that experience and the experience that I've had helping hundreds of other people in similar situations, I have this fierce desire to educate seniors and their families about what the future might hold and how they can prepare for it. So, you ready to get started? Let's get started. Let me see. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So, how to keep yourself in control. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, why do we need to have these conversations about housing? Financial and medical isn't going to cover it. Surveys tell us that 80% of seniors want to stay in their homes, but less than half of those think they'll be able to do so in the event of future physical limitations, mental decline, financial concerns, or even loneliness. Now, this is a valid concern because according to a study by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, those people who reach age 65, it's estimated that 69% of those are going to require long-term care services and support at some point in their life. That's a really high percentage. Now, if you reach 75, the percentage goes down a little bit. If you're at 75, you might have about a 50-50 chance of needing some long-term care and support sometime in your life. But then when you reach 85, that percentage increases to 75%. So if you're 85, you've got a 75% chance of needing some sort of long-term care in the future. Now, this is one of the reasons that we need to discuss future housing needs as people age. Unfortunately, many people have not saved enough to cover their living expenses in the event of a medical need, whether they stay at home or whether they don't. Now, baby boomers are getting older, that people have a lot more chronic health conditions, and we are really headed for a crisis. We don't have enough care providers. Many baby boomers financially don't have an opportunity, the timeline to change their financial position. So that is a big reason for our crisis. We're going to have a lot of people that are dying financially destitute over the next several years. So while I would love to prevent this from happening, and that is definitely one of my passions, it's totally a conversation for another time. So even with seniors that have managed to save a very healthy nest egg, you can't assume that that nest egg is going to fund their lifestyle while they're kind of in young retirement and their future care needs should they need them when they get older. Now, of course, nobody can predict the full scope of what those needs might be. Nobody can predict what the future holds, but reality tells us that we're living longer, but we're also living with more chronic health conditions. And most seniors don't really consider how their housing choices are going to affect their finances as well as their mental well-being. So my position is we really need to specifically bring the topic of housing into retirement planning discussions. And those seniors who hold an idealistic view of their lifestyle, they just think they're going to go until one day they just drop dead. Even though they've got warning signs, they may have high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, another chronic health condition. Those are the people that are ending up in crisis. But the good news is the right decisions at the right time can increase chances that the nest egg that they have built will last and that they can stay in control of their lifestyle for as long as possible and successfully age. So if the decision is to stay home, great, that's great. But there are likely going to be needs in the future that assure their safety and their comfort. So even if you plan to stay home and have them take you out in a pine box, you need to plan ahead for modifications, both financially and emotionally, because a lot of people don't like to admit, oh, I really need to add grab bars in my bathroom. I really need to have somebody in 2 or 3 times a week to help me with laundry or cooking or whatever. I'm not really emotionally ready for having to go to a support group for caring for my spouse who has Alzheimer's. So planning still needs to happen in order to be successful. Now, if you decide to make a move, you're going to have all kinds of questions. Where do I move? When do I move? What do I take? How am I going to get all this done? But having a team to help you through that early on when you're still available, when you're still, mentally in a good spot to make these decisions will help the process go a lot smoother if it's ever needed. So let's meet Jerry and Jean. Jerry and Jean were a sweet couple. That's not really them. So I think I'm up in the top corner, but that's not them. Anyway, Jerry and Jean were the sweetest couple. They had lived in their home for over 20 years. All their kids lived in a different area of the country. It was a large house, a large lot. Jean had been recently diagnosed with dementia. And early in her diagnosis, I met Jean and Jerry at their home and talked to them about their plans. Now, Jean was very excited about the possibility of moving to an independent living community where she could transition to a memory care unit, as her memory decline progressed. And she was fine with that. She was actually excited about being around other people and having some social connection. So Jerry was fine mentally. He did not have any issues, but he was really having trouble with his back. And kind of had some concerns about that. So they were really on the fence. They didn't really know if they wanted to move to a senior community or not. And the challenges that they talked about was their stuff. Everything that they talk about was their stuff. They needed to work on their stuff. They wanted their family to come and get their stuff. They wanted to fix their stuff. They wanted to fix the landscaping and this and that and the other. So, I said, okay, I gave them some pointers on how to do that. I wrote a book and I'll talk to you about that later, but talked about that. And he couldn't make a decision. He really wanted to move, but he wasn't really sure. So I said, okay, great. That's fine, Jerry. If you want to stay, here are some things that we need to discuss, some modifications you can make to your house that will help you stay safe and comfortable and help Jean stay safe and comfortable. And so he said, okay, well, I'll consider those things. But when I would check in with him, he was too busy or distracted by stuff to do anything to help them stay at home more successfully. So really, the matter was he hadn't really made the decision. It wasn't about the stuff. He couldn't decide. The stuff was actually a buffer for him to not face the fact that they needed to make some changes. The reality was Jean was not going to get better. And interestingly, she had accepted that and was looking forward to that. But Jerry was really struggling with that. And I don't blame him. That's hard to see your wife of over 50 years, kind of decline. And, I think he was hesitant about modifying the house because that meant he had to spend money on things that he wasn't sure he was going to use for very long because they might end up moving out. So he was kind of in a quandary about what to do. Moving, making that decision to move meant acknowledging that his health and his wife's health were not what they used to be. They were declining. They needed access to more support than he was used to having. He was used to being independent. And moving is scary, and it would be a lot of work for them. So instead of making a decision, he did nothing. And I kept checking in with them and wouldn't do anything. So it's not about the stuff. It's really about fear. So we've got to really dig deeper to address the fears. That's the elephant in the room. Dealing with your stuff is easy. You can control your stuff. And that's really the crux of the issue. You want to keep control. So dealing with your stuff seems logical. Gets people to shut up. But if you dig down, there's going to be deeper issues under the surface. So Jerry agreed to meet with me again, the second time, and I was able to uncover some of the fears that were holding him back. One of the fears was he was worried about Jean's transition. He was worried that she was going to be very upset leaving their longtime home and going to a place that was unfamiliar, which kind of contradicted what Jean was saying, which was she was very excited about moving to this community. So, sometimes dementia patients do have trouble with transitions, but the majority of the time they're very short-lived when they're surrounded by a supportive environment and their network of support. He really expressed just as much concern about himself making the transition. He was having to leave something familiar for something that was unknown. And isn't that scary for anybody of any age? It's scary to make a change. He was worried about the cost of the moving truck. He was questioning what they could get for the house when they sold it. He was wondering if somebody might be able to live in their basement apartment to help in exchange for help. Were the costs going to go up in a senior community if he decided to move there? So he would say, my financial advisor isn't really worried about those things, but I am. He was really struggling with seeing that cash flow and how it was going to work. He was also worried about losing his independence. He liked the privacy of their current home, and he didn't want help. He didn't want help moving boxes. He didn't want me to remind him or his wife with dementia to remind him to watch his step, despite the fact that he was repeatedly tripping and falling. I mean, that's a big indicator that you need some help, is repeated trips and falls. He didn't want help with chores. So he was really upset about leaving his neighborhood and his friends. But, another reason he was having trouble making decisions was he really didn't feel good. I've talked about how his back was hurting a lot. He was having trouble sleeping. And you know how you feel when you don't feel great. I mean, even when you're younger, you're just like, oh, I don't want to make that decision right now. I've got a headache or a cold or the flu. You just don't want to make big decisions. Well, Jerry was dealing with chronic pain and just didn't feel like taking on the weight of this huge decision. Poor Jerry was also basically starting to grieve the loss of his wife. She was really slipping away quickly. Between even our first and second meeting, I noticed a good bit of decline in her. So if you're familiar with the progression of dementia, that sometimes it happens very slowly and sometimes it happens very quickly. But ultimately, the person with dementia, their body is there, but they aren't the person that they used to be. And this will often start the grieving process before the person passes away physically. So after the second meeting, I got permission to loop in their family so the family could start to help. And we set up a visit for Jean and Jerry to go visit a senior community where they could they could move in together and live independently. People wouldn't bother them. And then Jean would be able to transition to a memory care unit in the future if that was ever needed, but they would have the support network for their medical needs close by. And then, so despite lots of encouragement and help from the family, from me, from a geriatric care manager, Jerry would consistently cancel appointments, would not really follow through on any suggestions, and they didn't do anything. And here's what's sad. A couple of weeks after our meeting, Jerry fell in the bathroom and he hit his head and managed to crawl back in bed, but he died. And Jean, his wife, was all alone in the house, and her dementia had progressed to the point she really didn't know what was going on. And so Jerry was there in the bed with Jean until a caregiver got there in the morning and found him. So his ambivalence and indecision didn't spare his wife, Jean, or their family from heartache and crisis. It didn't. It actually magnified it. It made it worse. If Jerry had made a commitment to stay home and acted on that commitment by making modifications and getting the additional help that he needed, who knows? Maybe his death could have been prevented. Instead, his children, who were scattered all over the country, were left scrambling to find a place for their mom, get to their mom, first of all, and then find a place for her to live and get the support that she needed, an appropriate community. They had to clean out and sell the house to pay for her care. So the whole situation was physically and emotionally tense and stressful. And as they were grieving the death of their father and clamoring to, I would say, mitigate the crisis that resulted, they were always saying to me, why weren't these decisions made sooner? This family cried on the couch a lot. because of this situation. And that is what I really want to stress to you, that it is so important to have conversations about these things so that this is not happening to you, because it happens every day all across the country. So it comes down to seniors just really want to stay in control of their decisions as they age. And the way to do that is to plan and communicate your wishes. Can I say that enough? Plan and communicate. It's really hard to do this at first. It's really hard to have conversations about future, death, dying, what you want and what you don't want. But you'll find once you break the ice with your loved ones about this, it gets easier to talk about. So making a plan, even if you never have to use it, you may never have to use it, but at least you've talked about it and you have an idea, and your family has an idea of what you want. So now I'm going to tell a personal story. John and Bonnie, these are my parents. And my dad had some health issues, nothing major, but when they were on vacation, just like my grandfather, my dad suffered a massive stroke. And he was in rehab for several months and got to a point where he could go home. And of course, my mom was the main caregiver and did all the things that she was supposed to do and got the modifications in the house and the grab bars and the wand down low in the shower to help him, rinsing legs and that kind of thing. So she was the main caregiver, and they were in a financial position where full-time in-home care was an option. But she didn't want it. She didn't want the help. Their home was in a remote location. It probably took 20 minutes for the nearest EMS to get to their house, and then 20 minutes back out of the neighborhood and 20 more minutes to the hospital. So that was a real concern for my sister and I. We really wanted them to be in a less remote location. We said, why don't you move closer to one of us? We can help you. We can stop in and check on you. No, that was not an option. They were going to do their own thing. We talked about, as my dad's continued to have mini strokes and was declining more and more, we said, what about putting him in an assisted living community? No, she always quoted her vows. She said, in sickness and health, and she was never, ever going to put him in a home. Okay, so, my sister and I were worried because my dad wasn't getting better, and he, wasn't going to get any better. I mean, this was the path that they were down. She was very secretive. She didn't want to share things with us. And my sister and I were really worried. She's a very small woman taking care of a very large man, and he needed 24/7 help. And this happens a lot with families. My sister and I were saying, oh, why don't you do this? And why don't you do that? Well, it was met with a big fat no. And I see that a lot with families. So sometimes it is helpful to have a third party come in and tell people things, but we'll talk about that later. I help a lot of families with that because sometimes parents won't listen to their kids, but they'll listen to somebody else on the outside. So my mom was very adamant about keeping him home, getting help until she had a scare of her own. Her heart wasn't feeling right. She went to the doctor, and the doctor scheduled a heart cath. And on the way to the hospital, I was, of course, going with her. We had a caregiver with my dad that day. He wasn't really in a mental place to even understand what was going on. And on the way to the hospital, she said, "What is going to happen to your dad if something happens to me?" And of course, there was kind of a long pause as I'm like going through all the things that, oh my gosh, she's right. What is going to happen to my dad if something happens to her? And so I just answered truthfully. I said, he's going to have to go to a community. I can't take care of him. I have a family, a job. He needs 24/7 care. And, as the daughter of a dad, there's things that you just can't really, you just don't want to do. And I know some people do it, but I know that I do not have the personality or the wherewithal to do that type of intense caregiving. So I just was honest. Thankfully, my mom's heart checked out great. But it took the third party, the cardiologist, telling her that her issue was not a problem with her heart, it was stress. And I remember sitting there listening into him talk and just thinking, oh, thank you. Thank you. If she didn't get help, it could turn into something serious. But that conversation was a real wake-up call. It was like a triggering event. And I'm really glad she listened, because after that day, we worked together to find her a community where she was going to feel comfortable and she could get the help she needed. They moved to an independent living community just in time. Some independent communities, you have to be able to walk in under your own power. And at that point, my dad could, but a few weeks later, he couldn't. So they would not have been able to move in. Those are the kinds of things that happen. That is why you need to talk about this before it's a problem. So as hard as it was for my mom to admit that my dad wasn't getting any better, facing that fear, getting her information and making decisions kept her in control. They got to move where they wanted to move. Thankfully, because like I said, a couple more weeks and that would not have happened. Once that decision on where they were going to move was made, getting rid of the stuff and the things, it was not a big deal. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. Make the decision first, worry about the stuff second. As I mentioned, a couple weeks after they moved in, my dad suffered another stroke, which left him unable to stand. And so he transitioned seamlessly from independent living to skilled nursing. They were in the same building. My mom lived 2 floors above him. And it didn't cost them any extra. They were in what's called a CCRC. And contact me if you want to learn more about that. But if she had waited to move him directly into skilled nursing, it probably would have cost them over about $160,000 in the 18 months that he lived after that final stroke. Well, he had more, but that final big stroke. She likely would have still been in that remote home, far away, panicking, not knowing what to do. But because they made the move early, she was able to just get on an elevator and go visit him whenever she wanted. They stayed together and until his passing in 2020. And, she made friends. She continues to join her community. And in hindsight, she tells me all the time, I'm so glad we made the move when we did. So glad. We should have done it earlier because your dad could have spent more time with me in the apartment. So was she scared? All of my clients are scared. they're worried, they're anxious, they're overwhelmed. And you know what? We get through a lot of that in our lives. There are a lot of scary times in our lives. Sometimes scary things turn out bad, and sometimes scary things actually turn out to be amazing. So things like moving out of your parents' house, your first day at a new job, getting married, having kids, retiring, all of that. Scary, but it's good. On the other side, you go, you know what? I'm really glad I did that. So even though it's scary, remind yourself or your family member that you've been in scary positions before and you have gotten through it just fine. You can do this. And on the other side, you are going to have a better life. So let me be clear. Not everybody needs to move, but whatever the decision is, you need to be ready and prepare for them. That takes me to our next story. It's about planning. And Zane got a cancer diagnosis and had treatment for a while, and but then it wasn't working anymore. So Zane decided to spend his final days at home. He knew how hard it was going to be because he had been the caregiver for his wife during her final years, and hospice had come in and all of that. She passed away in her home. So he knew it was a lot of work. And he knew that his family was going to need to be supportive of him to make it work. He could afford 24/7 care in his home. But even though he could, he knew he was going to need a family member to advocate on his behalf and make sure his care plan was being followed and make sure that everything was managed properly. There were going to be gaps in service. His daughter was a former hospice RN and understood there were gaps in the service. Sometimes a caregiver couldn't show up or had an emergency, and this was going to have to be all hands on deck. He didn't care about his stuff. He was just planning for the inevitable. He could have like done like Jerry and worried about the stuff and not planned for his future. But he really wanted time with the people that he loved. Kids would come over and start rummaging through his things, and he'd say, "Stop, stop, stop. I just want to spend time with you." So he wanted to focus on the relationships in his final days. And, the in-home care providers, of course, were amazing. And they had family available to meet the gaps. They actually created a schedule to have somebody at the house with him at all times, even when the paid caregivers were there. And one of them was a retired son-in-law who stayed full-time for the last 8 weeks of his life. And he coordinated and managed and filled in the gaps. A hospital bed was brought in, some other modifications were made, and he did eventually pass away in his home, surrounded by family. But it took a lot of planning and a lot of work and effort on his support network to make that happen. So it's possible to remain at home for a short period or a long period of time, as long as everybody is prepared for the financial and emotional implications that come with that. So whatever your decision, stay home, move to a community, prepare for your challenges. And finally, I want to just reiterate that your plan can change. It can change. You don't have to stick with the plan. It's fine. Make a plan, do it, don't do it, change it when you find something better. Somebody's available, somebody's not available. Just kind of keep that conversation going all the time. Now, this is an interesting situation. Bob and Kathy had decided many years ago to age in place. They had 2 adult children living with them to help. They had separate apartments, and it was working fine. And Bob's health was starting to decline. They made some home modifications. They hired help. They had a family living in with them. And they too were in a financial position to continue down that path. But they really panicked about how far they lived from healthcare. It was 40 minutes for an ambulance to arrive one time after Bob fell. And that really stirred something in them, and they gave me a call. And Bob's health was declining very quickly. His face was really drawn and ashen, and he barely could lift his arms off of the recliner where he was sitting. He was on oxygen. And they just said, you know what, we're really rethinking this aging in place thing. We're not sure that this is for us. So they did not want to move to a community. So we prepped the house for sale and found them a new place to live. And, they had lived in this house for 40 years. And for them, it really seems like, the stuff would make a big, the question of what to do with the stuff would have made perfect sense for them. But they were so ready to move from this large property, and maintaining it, and the financial drain and the distance, that they could not get rid of their stuff fast enough. So it's not about the stuff, it's about the decisions. And changing their mind actually worked out wonderfully, because changing their mind on the aging in place thing, because we found them a little place in a 55 plus community. That's a much smaller house. Their children moved in the same neighborhood, so they were very close by. Their daughter actually lived with them, and their son just lived just down the road. And Bob basically got a new lease on life. I visited them several times after they moved. He was a veteran, so I always took cookies on Veterans Day. And he just loved living in that neighborhood. The transformation was absolutely unbelievable. Every time I visited, he was happy, vibrant, still very frail, but his demeanor was different. The children were not as burdened because they weren't worried about taking care of the property. They weren't worried about how long it was going to take an ambulance to get there if something happened. And they actually got to spend more time enjoying their parents. And Bob loved just visiting with people who would stop by, because the houses were real close together, and he could sit on the porch and wave at people as they walk their dogs. And I really think that move is the reason he lived several more years. The burden of his home and the financial stress and the emotional stress was lifted. And so if you can be honest with yourself, you can create a plan and craft your situation so that it will allow you to live the rest of your life to the fullest, whatever that looks like. So I once had a client who said, people worry about their stuff. I don't know why. But I think it's because it's the one tangible thing we can control. So it's all about control. So let's have these conversations about what we want and what we want our life to look like. Do we want our life to look like taking care of a big home and all the stuff and spending all of our time and money and energy and mental brain power on that? Or do we want our life to look less burdened, maybe with less stuff, and focusing on the things that really matter? Now we know why these conversations are critical. And we know that it's the decisions that are the hard part. So what do we do now? What now? First, don't panic. All right, don't panic. Just because you're getting older doesn't mean all these things are going to happen to you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to downsize anytime soon. You don't. I've met with a lot of potential clients recently, and I've told them, you know what? You don't really need to downsize right now, but you do need to think about what you will do if something happens to you medically or financially. What is your plan? Worst case scenario, what is your plan? Second, you really need to be honest with yourself about your current situation and the planning that you have already done for your future. Do you have chronic health conditions that could be debilitating? Is your current home a burden on you physically, emotionally, financially? Are you isolated? Do you have friends or family expressing concerns about your safety or your mental health, maybe? If so, go to my website, silverpathwayshome.com, and on there's a link on the home page to a quiz. It's a downsizing quiz. Take that quiz and share your results with me. I'll put that on the screen here in a bit. But the third thing you need to do is reach out to professionals who can help guide you. So, of course, your attorney, make sure all those legal documents are up to date, your financial advisor, and you might even want to have somebody like me on your team for the hands-on help you're going to need in the future when the time comes for a transition. It could be a planned transition. It could be an unplanned transition. I offer a free consultation call, and you will walk away with the next 2 to 5 steps based on your situation and goals, 2 to 5 things that you need to really do and think about. So get in touch with me for that. And then finally, communicate. Communicate, communicate, communicate with your loved ones, your friends, a professional team. All these people have your best interest in mind, and they want to help you. So make sure that you're communicating with people. Now, I talked about professional partners. Here's a list of some that you might want to consider. I mentioned the financial planner. Have these conversations early. If you're watching this for a parent or loved one and you're in your 40s or 50s, start talking to the financial planner now so you can be financially prepared. An elder law attorney, a geriatric care manager. These folks can be advocates for you on the medical side as you age. And they're really a great resource for success stories. Your insurance agent, of course, on how to fund future care. Reverse mortgage lenders may have options for funding future care. Estate sale companies can help with clean out. But don't plan on a lot of cash from an estate sale unless you just have a lot of luxury items or a lot of very large tools. A move manager can help with the moving process, be like a project manager to coordinate all the moving parts. A real estate agent, if there's that needs to be sold. There's a designation which I have called an SRES for Seniors Real Estate Specialist. So if you are out of my area, you might want to look for one of those. I actually won a national award for my service to seniors from the National Association of Realtors in 2020 for that. Also, don't be afraid to go in and talk with admissions agents in the different communities where you live or where you think you might want to move. Maybe you want to move out of state and move closer to children, but still be in some type of community. So go talk to those people. In-home care agencies, whether you need a little or a lot, they are great to know who they are and who you're going to trust. Handymans and contractors, keeping your property maintained benefits not only you, but your heirs. Should you, get carried out in the pine box, your children will be dealing with your estate. So having the home in good repair while you're living there is very important. An aging in place specialist can help you with home modifications. Maybe you need more lighting. So it's not just for large projects, but it's for small projects as well. And if you need any ideas, call me. I can guide you through the process of planning. And I actually have a vetting process if you're out of my area to help you find resources in the area where you are. Unfortunately, in the event of a crisis, a third party often has to step in and quickly take control of the situation and make quick decisions. And the senior really feels left out and out of control and defeated. So let's work to prevent that by planning. Finally, let me see. Here are a couple of resources that you might want to check out that I have. First, I mentioned earlier the quiz. It's on my homepage, or you can also go directly to this address, silverpathwayshome.com/CSA, and take that downsizing quiz. At the end, there is a report that will show like your level of readiness. So it's very interesting. There's a lot of tips as you go through that quiz. So go ahead and take that quiz for yourself, your family member, or if you're a professional, for your client, and share those results with me. I do a free consultation call. There's a link on my website to my calendar, silverpathwayshome.com, where you can sign up to have a call with me. And finally, my book is Downsizing with Heart, Planning a Successful Senior Move, and it is available on Amazon, either a Kindle or a paperback format. So before you go, I have one more quick story to tell you. Remember my grandmother, the newly widowed, Parkinson's disease, rural house in Florida? She loved her community, but how do you think her life would have gone if she had remained at home because she couldn't make any decisions? We'll never know. Because she was realistic about her situation, our family was realistic about her situation, and she decided she was going to set aside her fears and her insecurities about change and move in with our family. So the transition for all of us was definitely an adjustment time, but what a legacy she left by being in our home for 10 years, being able to spend daily time with myself and my sister. And she actually was a hospice volunteer and told stories at the children's library and did yoga literally until the day she died. So let's show seniors that with a little planning and a lot of communication and support, they can stay in control. You can stay in control. Your parents can stay in control. Live a satisfying, wonderful life, enjoying the things that matter the most to them. So I want to thank you for sticking it out till the end. Again, my name is Jill Hart. I'm the owner of Silver Pathways Consulting, professional sorting, organizing, move management, real estate brokerage, and settling in services. If I can help in any way, please reach out. Thanks for coming.